The Modi government's last budget attempts to woo three sections of voters. Farmers with a 6,000 rupee annual income support scheme, unorganized workers with a pension plan, and salary taxpayers with a load of promises that will come into effect in the next budget if this government is voted back to power. So are these poll promises made during the interim budget speech strong enough to put the BJP and Narendra Modi back in pole position before the next elections? To speak more on this, I'm joined now by senior Congress leader and former Union Minister Shashi Tharoor. Mr. Tharoor, thank you for speaking with us here at Bloomberg Quint. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you. Is that Audrey?
No, this is Tamanna. Thank you so much for speaking with us. My first question is that you have to admit that the Modi government has put the Congress in a bit of a pickle. Your minimum income guarantee scheme is in a sense preempted by a farmer income support scheme that has already been announced, and the next government, whichever it may be, would find it very difficult not to implement the income tax relief that this government has already announced for next July.
Look, on the income tax relief, I don't think we'll have a problem. I think it makes sense to do that. And as far as I'm concerned, you're looking at a government which has been dipping its hands into the pockets of the middle class for the last 3 years, including through swinging petrol taxes of 20 rupees per litre of petrol and excise duty and so on. So they're really giving back to the middle class what they've taken away with their other hand. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not a bad thing. As far as the other issue is concerned, however, the 6,000 rupees income support announced to farmers is not a minimum income guarantee. It boils down to 500 rupees a month, and nobody is going to be able to live meaningfully with honor and dignity, to use the minister's words, on 500 rupees a month. What the Congress party is talking about is a real minimum income. Also, this government has excluded landless labor, farm labor in the rural areas that don't own up to 2 hectares of land. They're excluded. The urban poor are excluded. Whereas what the Congress president announced is an intention to provide a minimum living income to people who are the poor, irrespective of urban or rural, whether they own land or do not. It's purely a poverty alleviation measure. So we will certainly be coming back to the nation with something far better thought out, more detailed than what the government is proposing, and it will also, if necessary, have to roll into it some existing subsidies so that the resultant sum of money available will be substantial enough to make a real difference to people's lives. 500 rupees a month
just a minute, Mr.
will
Tharoor.
not do it.
So when Rahul Gandhi announced the scheme, there was no detail of what kind of a minimum income guarantee we're looking at. It was promised that it would be out in the Congress manifesto. Are we seeing a figure that would be more than 6,000 rupees a month in the Congress manifesto, which should be released shortly?
I'm not going to preempt the announcements in the Congress manifesto, but I will tell you that the onus is always on the government of the day to come up with specific schemes, to work out the numbers and to present them to the nation. The government has all the resources, it has taxpayer-funded staff, it has the research capacity, it actually runs the budget. So of course it should be the government that first provides details and the opposition that responds. It's a bit, I think, unfair to be pointing the fingers at the opposition first, saying, where are your numbers? Our numbers will follow, but let's see what the government can do. If this is the best that they can do, it's not good enough. And you will see that our numbers are a good deal better.
Okay, I request you to hold on. We're also joined now by Rajiv Chandrasekhar, BJP MP. Mr. Chandrasekhar, you missed perhaps the first comments that Mr. Tharoor made, but his point was that 6,000 rupees annually for farmers is just not enough. It works out to about 16.5 rupees a day, which would not provide dignity to farmers. Do you think that amount will be enough, even though the first 2,000 rupees should hit beneficial farmers before the elections, really?
No, I think the Congress has latched on to this line without trying to understand or deliberately not understanding what this is about. This is an income support program. This is not an income program. And the Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is committed to an overall framework of transforming the economics of agriculture and transforming the economic lives of farmers. This is one element of it. There is the MSP element of it. There is the whole ecosystem of improving productivity and improving profitability of his crop. There is the insurance scheme. The income support is an element of transition support till the income of farmers will double, as the Prime Minister has laid out as an objective for his government. So to use just one piece of the overall ecosystem and say it is 17 rupees per day, etc., is to play politics at a time when I think politics is the main focus of the Congress. So I don't want to get into this debate about whether this is adequate, because this is what it is supposed to be. It's an income support to the farmer. This has to be seen as one piece of an overall set of initiatives that the government has embarked on for an overall outcome of doubling farm incomes by 2022.
Okay, Mr. Chandrasekhar, you're saying that you don't want to talk about politics, but isn't this a political budget? Looking at the fact that income tax relief has been announced in a way that cannot be implemented right now. It's a preemptive announcement in a sense, where you're expecting the next government, whichever it may be, to announce all of these income tax cuts and income tax relief next July after the elections. Do you think it's right to make these announcements now at the fag end of this government's tenure?
No, Savana, I didn't want to discuss politics. I said I don't want to be baited into the Congress's politics of criticizing the budget. I will tell you what I believe is the strategy of the budget and what is the intentions of the government. It is the Congress's job to critique it and talk about it. But I believe, as I've said, this budget, and I've said this just before your program as well, this is not a budget that has to be seen as an election budget. This is the 6th budget of a 5-year term government, and this budget is not inconsistent with what the previous budgets have been. This budget is in continuum to the last 5 budgets. It has addressed the middle class, because the last 5 years the middle class has borne the brunt of the spending programs of the government for the poor in all of its schemes, and has done so, and the government has expanded this fiscal headroom and the fiscal capacity of the government without compromising on the fiscal consolidation goals and the fiscal prudence goals it had set for itself. So my point was that this is not an election budget or a political budget per se. Every budget is political. Every budget is, in a sense, part of a 5-year term of a government. And the 5-year term of a government is what goes to be discussed and decided by the electorate during elections. It's not one budget alone.
Okay. Shashi Tharoor, I would like you to respond to the points that Rajiv Chandrasekhar is making.
Let me respond to that, if I may, because there's something, I would very much like to respond to that, because first of all, for Rajiv to suggest that farmer incomes can double by 2020, as the minister said, is laughable, since that was the very promise that was made at the beginning of the BJP government's tenure. And far from farmers' incomes doubling, they've actually suffered a loss in real terms. Actually, input costs have gone up and their income has gone down, which is why you're seeing a record level of farmer suicides. And a farmer about to commit suicide is not going to change his mind because of 500 rupees a month. Let's be very blunt about the cynicism implicit in this particular assurance of the government's. It is, as the minister spelled out, it is 6,000 rupees to be paid in 3 equal installments, the first one immediately, which means all this is about is sending 2,000 rupees of the taxpayers' money to farmers in time for them to cast their vote in the coming elections. It is the most blatantly cynical vote-gathering exercise and has little to do with any serious actuarial calculations. It has very little to do with providing a meaningful support to poor people in order to alter their life circumstances. It really is about sending 2,000 rupees in the next few weeks. Well, good luck to them. I hope that farmers have better sense than to be taken in by this gesture.
Yes, Mr. Chandrasekhar, I see you want to respond to that.
Tamanna, this is pretty funny, because the gentleman who's talking about cynicism should just rewind and go back to 2014, when his government did a 70,000 crore loan waiver on the election eve, got the fiscal deficit to spike to 6%, and did not believe that there was any cynicism at that stage. This step by this government is in contrast to what the Congress has done all its life, is a measured response to transforming the agricultural economy. And it's one step amongst a series of things it is doing over the last 5 years. Number one. Number two, the doubling of farm income goal was set out in 2017, not in 2014. Mr. Tharoor has obviously forgotten that little date. Number three, all of this is done, Tamanna, without upsetting the fiscal apple cart. And using Mr. Tharoor's favorite phrase of cynicism, 2014, in the name of the farmer, the then government destroyed the credit culture and destroyed any sense of fiscal prudence in the government. This government has spent 20,000 crores more this year for farmers, 75,000 crores next year for farmers, and still ends up with a fiscal deficit of 3.36 this year and 3.4 next year. That, in my humble opinion, and I'm not as erudite and intelligent as some people across the aisle, is, in my opinion, doing the right thing by the farmers and doing the right thing responsibly.
Okay, I want to bring the focus back.
As far as
Okay, Mr. Tharoor, respond, and then I just want to move to other factors.
But let me just respond on the
yes.
fiscal.
Yes.
On the fiscal deficit numbers, the fact is that every single year, without exception in these 5 years, the government has missed its fiscal deficit numbers, its projected numbers, and shifted the goalposts the following year. So if you go back to Mr. Jaitley's budget speech in 2014, you would have seen us at 3% 2 years ago. We're now at 3.4, and the projection is that we are on course, says Mr. Goyal, to be at 3% in 2020, and I don't believe it for a minute. The point is, these things are said to convey a certain reassurance, and as a good Indian, I'm very happy that the world may or may not be reassured. But the truth is, if you just go on factcheck.in today, you will see the number of claims Mr. Goyal made in his speech that were either inaccurate, downright inaccurate, or grossly exaggerated. We've got to a point where people don't trust this government's numbers, and therefore to build a thesis of fiscal responsibility on numbers that are frankly not entirely trustworthy is also, I'm afraid, rather dubious. But I'm happy to leave it there because we're never going to agree on this.
Yes,
Mr.
which is why I want to,
all I will say is that
absolutely, which is why I want to move to a broader question. Now, this budget, political or not, as Mr. Chandrasekhar is claiming, does come just weeks before the next election dates will be announced. And the question is, let's look at where the BJP government stands right now. And this question is for Rajiv Chandrasekhar. You've had a jobs data report leaked to a top business newspaper yesterday, which shows unemployment rates at the highest in 45 years. You have widespread farmer distress, which has hurt the party's prospects in the last 3 state elections in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan. So you are tackling, unhappiness and the lack of achhe din, to put it in quotes, on several fronts. Do you think that enough was said and done in this budget? Will it suffice to announce a 10-point vision up to 2030 when you have to persuade voters to bring you back in just a couple of months?
So Tamanna, you see, I don't have to necessarily, answer that question in any other way than say, look, you may disagree with my point of view, and Mr. Tharoor may disagree with my point of view. I think the point is that this will be played out in April, May of 2019. I am fairly confident. so is my party, that what we have done, what Prime Minister Modi's government has delivered over the last 5 years, and yes, there have been mistakes, yes, there have been some problems, in sum would be something that the people of India would say is a much better deal than where the economy and the country was left in 2014 by the Congress. And yes, this marks also a good launch pad for the next coming decade in terms of high growth and prosperity for all. This is our contention, and it is not for me to persuade you or Mr. Tharoor about that. I think it is for the people of India to decide in April, May 2019.
Mr. Tharoor, on the claim that at the end of 5 years, the Modi government stands better than UPA did at the end of its 5 years before the 2014 elections. And one of those big claims is that महंगाई की कमर तोड़ दी. The work done on inflation. Do you think that they have enough to go to the people? And of course, I trust that you will leave all the political rhetoric out of it and look at it dispassionately.
Listen, let me say very honestly that obviously, given the fact that UPA-2 had an average crude oil price of $140 a barrel, and Mr. Modi's first 3 years were 40, 37 and 65 respectively, it seems to me that there was a windfall that obviously would have been reflected in lower inflation, because petrol prices and fuel prices affect every item in the economy. So clearly that was a windfall for the government. I still think, however, that they missed the opportunity to put more money in the hands of consumers by instead exploiting the windfall to actually tax the consumers more at the pump. So in the end, nobody actually got any benefit from the collapse of the international price of crude oil except the government. But look at the areas that have been left out. And I'll just take two. One is the entire employment situation. We have the NSSO report that says that 6.1% is the employment figure for 2017-18, a 45-year high. And if you look at it, it compares with 2.2% during UPA 2. And if you compare it to today's situation of the urban young, that is people between 15 and 29 are looking for jobs, 18.7% of urban males are unemployed. Now, this is a national crisis. The minister did not address it at all in his remarks, not even one sentence. The other aspect that I wanted to mention, where I suspect Rajiv Chandrasekhar might be inclined to agree with me, was the missed opportunity to stimulate investment. We have been saying for a few years now, how about giving investors a break? Why do you want to tax angel investment? Why don't you, for example, give a tax holiday to angel investors? It'll give real muscle to your Startup India scheme. Instead of which, all the government came up with last year, not this year, was a 3-year tax holiday for the profits made by startups. Well, how many startups actually make profits in their first 3 years? Very few. If you actually gave the angel investors a break, they might be able to pump more money into startups. So there are missed opportunities staring us in the face that have been pointed out by the opposition in each of the last 2 budget debates.
Mr. Chandrasekhar, of course, you must respond to those points, especially about jobs and startups. And then I want to come to you on the MIG, or the Minimum Income Guarantee Scheme. But first, please to respond to the 2 points that Shashi Tharoor raised.
No, so I think, this is, with great respect to the former minister of the Congress government, I think there is a double speak on this oil windfall that needs to be busted. I think what they refused to say and complete the narrative on was that when they left government, they left the oil marketing companies saddled with almost 3.5 lakh crores of sovereignly guaranteed debt, which had to be paid off by somebody. And that is what the government used a large part of the oil, so-called the windfall, to do, which is to recapitalize the oil marketing companies that were almost near bankrupt in May 2014. So, I just want that for everything that they said, that you complete the second part of the narrative. The second part about this NSSO thing, Tamanna, and I want to spend some time in explaining my point of view. I know yesterday that Niti Aayog tried to say something. I wasn't particularly pleased with what they said.
Yeah, I mean, just an
NSSO
aside, what was that press
conducted.
conference? That was a really weak defense. But, anyway, you admit that as well, so do continue.
Yeah. Anyway, so the NSSO survey, please understand, is a survey that was conducted right after DeMon and the GST, and it was in the midst of the GST. So it is obviously picked up in the informal sector, the chaos and the churn that was happening post the DeMon in the short term and post GST in the short term. If you look at 2018 budget, that budget specifically talked about the need for transition support for the chaos and the disarray that was caused to the informal sector. Everybody knew that DeMon and GST would cause problems in the MSME sector and the informal sector. And budget 2018 addressed that. So I am not even contesting that the NSSO may have taken a snapshot of what was obviously a very chaotic situation after GST and DeMon. I'm not even arguing with that. But please understand one thing, to argue that in a sense reflects overall job loss is to ignore the strong expansion of the formal sector with the EPFO data. The strong investment record of almost 12 lakh crores in infrastructure by the public sector alone in the last 4 years. And it's to ignore every other indicator that says that in the formal sector job increase is on the move. Now we must accept, and this is not political, that the data that we have is on the informal sector, which is what the NSSO is supposed to represent, is at best what a survey is. And you've heard of surveys being a sample. It depends on the sample set, it depends on the timing, it depends on many factors. And I'm not suggesting at all that the survey is wrong. But post that survey, a number of things have happened, including budget 2018 and now budget 2019, that are expressly targeting the informal sector. So I would argue here that the job picture is not as bleak as the Congress would like us to believe.
The problem with that survey story, Mr. Chandrasekhar, fine. I get your point. But the problem with that survey story was also the hesitant to release it.
I don't say stories.
Okay. The problem with the whole survey situation is the hesitance of the government to release that data. You had 2 members of the NSC who quit over that. And then the data happens to paint the government in an unflattering light. That is the question that you must pose to the government, and I think that's a legitimate question, saying why was that survey not released and why did these members quit? I think that's a legitimate question to be posed, and somebody should answer that in a better form that the Niti Aayog answered yesterday. Okay, Mr. Tharoor.
The last point.
Also say that while Rajiv.
I just want to finish, Tamanna. That last point that Shashi mentioned was about investment.
Yes, okay. Yes, Rajiv, do continue that point. Yeah.
No, Shashi, no. I'm not conceding anything. This is not a game that we are playing about conceding, or this is not some, we are having a conversation. So I'm not conceding anything on what you said.
Mr. Chandrasekhar, please continue. Please continue your investment point. Yes.
Yeah, so no, I think Shashi Tharoor talked about investment. Now again, it is to gloss over the reality that in 2014 the main engine for investment in India, which is the credit delivery system, which is the banking system, was broken. You know it, Tamanna, 80% of capital that goes into investment in India is credit. Out of 80%, 70% is public sector banks. i.e. 56 to 60% of the total capital that goes to fuel economic activities in India was broken from May 2014. It is only now getting repaired. It is only now that credit in an organized manner is coming from the public sector banks back into the system. So if the investment was stalled on account of domestic investment, it was made up to a large extent by the consumption side of the economy, but there was a reason for why domestic investment stalled, and that reason was the broken banking system that was a gift from Shashi Tharoor's government to this government in May 2014.
Your response to that, Mr. Tharoor?
It still doesn't answer my question as to No, it still doesn't answer the point I made, which is that an opportunity has been missed to actually use the tax system to stimulate investment rather than to offer imaginary rewards for non-existent profits. But going back to Rajiv's point, he said that the National Sample Survey is undoubtedly right, but he said it was merely a picture of a particular time in the economy. The fact is he's right, but the causes he mentions, demonetization and the botched implementation of GST, were not acts of God. They were acts, self-inflicted wounds by this particular government. And therefore, the actual consequences being borne by the Indian citizen are consequences born of willful decisions taken by the government whose policies Mr. Chandrasekhar is defending. So my point is that, of course, demonetization causes damage. Of course, the botched, hasty and inept implementation of a multi-layer GST caused some damage. But who did that? It was the government of India that did it, and that's why they don't deserve a second chance. Finally, as far as the job situation is concerned, if you want to move beyond the NSSO, which you say is a snapshot of a particular time, let's look at the latest report of the All India Manufacturers Organization, which says that since 2016 November, 3.5 million jobs have been lost in India. That's a two-year period they're talking about. 3.5 million jobs lost. So I'm afraid we're looking at, that's a very conservative figure, because you know the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy actually put the figure at 11 million, 1.1 crore last year alone. So between the 3.5 of the All India Manufacturers Organization and the 11 million of the CMIE, we're looking at a colossal jobs crisis, and this government just refuses to face it.
All right, this back and forth will continue, but I want to thank both Shashi Tharoor and Rajiv Chandrasekhar for a very sensible, sorted and pointed debate on whether this budget will give any impetus to the project that the BJP has launched to bring back Narendra Modi as Prime Minister for a second term. The final decision, of course, lies with you, the viewers and the voters.